All right, what do you look for when you're trying to find an issue with a Mikuni SBN carburetor? Let me just go through some of the common things to check for if you want to make sure that it's working properly. The first thing is the O-ring that goes here. It can't be garbage. It needs to be the right dimension. There's a lot of aftermarket crap out there, and if this O-ring doesn't seal, your pump's not going to make pressure. So you can't use crap parts, and there's a heck of a lot of them, so you got to be real careful. Because the only thing that seals this against this with a good pressure seal is that O-ring. There's a flat diaphragm that goes there too, but that doesn't seem to play as big of a role. But ultimately, this has got a seal, and you're going to find that out when you run your pop-off test. So pop-off to me is not that meaningful. Pop-off is pretty much set by the spring itself. The spring and the lever set pop-off more or less, and the size of that needle, or I guess the size of the opening in the seat actually. That's what sets your pop off. So pop off doesn't really change unless you change this hardware. So everyone gets worked up about pop off, but it's pretty standard pressure unless you go messing with one of those things. But what the pop off test does tell you, to me, that's more valuable is it actually tells you if your fuel pump has a leak. Because if your pressure is leaking down, it's not staying before the needle pops off. That means you have a leak somewhere, and it's typically in this fuel pump region. If your pump doesn't leak, then the other things you want to check for is these check valves need to have a good seal. So that seat, that ridge there needs to be good. And people sometimes poke holes in the rubber. You need to make sure the rubber doesn't have a hole in it. Because again, fuel is not going to go where it's supposed to if any of that stuff is no good. This sealing surface needs to be good here, and this O-ring obviously, but those are pretty problem free. This diaphragm needs to not be broken. Sometimes these will break or get stressed, pretty stretched out and so on, so you don't want that. So this diaphragm here is pretty important because this is what drives your fuel pump, and the gasket below it needs to have a good seal. Usually put it together with oil or something, that way you get a good seal. Sometimes that dry paper doesn't catch like you want it to. And then underneath this gasket, if you clean this surface off, you got to do a pretty good job, but you got to leave the aluminum ridges there to kind of bite into that gasket. You don't want to grind them away or anything like that. But as long as this is sealed, and you can tell because you can blow in this with a few psi, even with your mouth, and see if it holds pressure, or you can put 5-10 psi with a pressure gauge and see if it holds. But yeah, this area shouldn't leak. The other thing to check for is this little hole here tends to get blocked. So you should be able to blow into this port. That's your return port to the tank. If you can't blow air in here, this carb's not going to work right. So you need to go in there with a little needle or something and get that cleared out with compressed air or whatever. Get creative, but that needle has to flow. And you don't want to go drilling it open or anything because that's going to screw up the setting on the carburetor, and that will control how much fuel is going back to the tank. Everything else here is pretty straightforward. These don't tend to clog up or anything. The big thing on Sea-Doo carbs is this filter clogs. So this filter will get clogged up and not let the fuel pass through there. So this internal filter needs to be clean, just like the one you see here. That way fuel can go through there. So you can clean these filters out. They're very much reusable. It's not a big deal. So yeah, these ports tend to get clogged, so you need to make sure they're open and air is passing through. Like I said, check that orifice, but also you'll want air to pass through here without an issue. And then you're on to this side. Obviously, your jets need to be open. Typically, if that fuel filter is working right, nothing is going to clog up the jets. But nonetheless, you want to make sure the jets are clear and you can blow air through them. So I usually blow air through here and make sure it passes through this hole on the other side. You'll get a lot of flow there. And then likewise, push air in this hole down here, the low speed, and make sure air passes through these holes on the other side. It's not going to flow a lot, but there will be a little flow that goes through there, and that's kind of how you can check your low speed operation there. Yeah, that's pretty much, I mean, the butterflies obviously got to move and stuff, so if there's corrosion and they're sticking, that's a pretty common problem. But a lot of the issues are the fuel pump leaks, the filter's clogged, these are clogged. You know, another thing to look out for that I kind of forgot, there's a seat with a O-ring on it. So this is a seat and it has a little O-ring. These O-rings aren't very good. I usually swap them out with a better material. I use FKM O-rings on here instead of the standard nitrile rubber. I put these FKM O-rings on there because they hold up a little better. They tend to not soften up in fuel and leak. But if that O-ring leaks, your needle will leak, and it will act just like a needle that leaks. So this needle goes in here and it has to seal. So when you do a pop-off test, the other thing you can see is if you're leaking at this O-ring or at this needle. Either one is going to cause fuel to go by there, and it's going to cause your engine to flood with fuel when it's really not supposed to be getting fuel. So yeah, these have to hold pressure. They have to work. They have to pop off with significance when you run your pop-off test. You don't want any sort of fuel passing through there early or anything. That's why it is important to run that test, but usually these are pretty good. Usually I don't have a lot of issues with those. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of the major stuff I can think of, and that's what I tend to try to look for. The metering block, this check valve has to work, but these are pretty trouble-free. These can usually be reused as is. There's not a lot of things to go wrong there. And that's what I would look for when you do your checks.